Well, welcome to the Inviting Shift podcast. I'm your host, Christina Smith, and I'm so excited about this topic this week because I think it's a real problem, especially when we get to midlife, that we start looking at, and that is productivity. We have an addiction to productivity, and today a productivity specialist is going to talk about this addiction to productivity that we have. Valerie Recore is a productivity specialist, a time giver, and a certified fair play method facilitator. She helps moms gain a sense of control, spend more time with their families, and end their days feeling accomplished. With a background in mental health and corporate training, she's ready to guide you toward a better relationship with time. If you're ready to start feeling more peace and accomplishment at the end of the day, she's here to help. Well, welcome, Valerie, to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I know that we have this huge topic today, but tell us a little bit first about what it is that you do and how you help people.
Yeah. So I'm a productivity specialist and I work with moms. And my goal is to help moms gain a sense of control and spend more time with their families and end their days feeling at peace. Essentially, I believe that moms do too much. And my goal is to help moms focus on the important things and the things that are important in their lives versus all the things.
Yeah. So focusing on what's most important, that's definitely down my line. I love that. So today we're going to talk about productivity. And I know for me, my clients, when they first come to me, even though they're in midlife and maybe they're just letting go of their kids, there's a real core belief about if I'm not productive, then I'm lazy, I'm a waste, I'm not doing anything with my life. So everything has to have a productivity value. And one of the impacts I see is that it takes away from people doing creative things. That's one impact, but I'm sure you have a lot more to tell us about this. What is your theory on productivity, and how does it work with moms or women in general?
Yeah. So I think in our society, we have been told that we need to keep producing. Whatever that means, we need to just keep doing things. Our to-do lists are endless, and we don't know how to take those breaks. But that we're told that our value is wrapped up in how much we get done every day, whether that's tasks around the house or tasks related to raising our children or growing our careers. We need to just be constantly producing something. And that if we do take those breaks, like you said, that we're lazy, I'm not realizing that we need those breaks, that we're actually more productive when we do have time that is restorative and time away from all of that stuff, that we come back more energized and ready to dive into everything. But I think society really just leads us to believe that we need to continually be climbing the corporate ladder, growing our business so that it's not just you or you and a VA, that suddenly you've expanded to where you have a team and you're consistently growing it. Now you have an empire versus just a business that is making you happy and making a difference in the world. And we need to be kind of keeping up with the Joneses, that we need to continually be upgrading our house and our car and wanting the next big thing. And then we work to get there, right? Because it all costs money. And so we need to be working and producing to buy that next big thing instead of looking at kind of where we are and really understanding, is that what we want? Is that what is making us happy? Do we want to keep climbing the corporate ladder? Do we want to keep expanding our business? And if you do, and that is what makes you happy, then please have at it. I think,
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm not telling you to just quit right now. Please hear that. But I want us to go into that with some intentionality of, this is what I really want, or this is the next big step. I think then on the flip side of that, because our identities become so wrapped up, or maybe not the flip side, but this is just combined with that, is because our identities are then so wrapped up in all of that, when we retire or we lose our jobs, we then don't know who we are anymore, because our identity is so wrapped up in all of that, maybe in motherhood. that's been your goal. Maybe you've just been somebody who is so focused on your children that you haven't taken the time to figure out who you are outside of your kids. And suddenly they leave the house and you're going, okay, now what? I don't know who I am anymore without my kids in the house. And so being able to just step back from all of that and have that not be part of our identity is also important.
I love that so much because I can totally relate. When I was working a job and I was a single mother, and then I met my second husband, and like I was so wrapped up in productivity and how much more could I do. And it seemed like I was even adding stuff to the to do list so I could feel really good about what I accomplished that day. Right. But what happened for me is I got really sick and with my gut, and I would be in bed for a couple months at a time. And that would throw me into the deepest depression because I couldn't get things done. I didn't feel useful. I felt like a bad mom. I felt like I was letting everybody else down. And it took me so long to flip that and go, no, I'm taking care of myself. That's what I'm doing right now. Um, and so it kept me sick for a really long time because I was like, I should be able to do all this stuff. I did it all before, but what I was doing was burning myself out. And that's when I would take my rest, only when I burned myself out and I was completely exhausted and sick. And then I could rest. And it was such a waste of life back then. I had to rethink about like what am I doing with my life and how am I treating myself? And I think especially when we get into our 40s and 50s, our bodies don't work the same as they did in our 20s and 30s. And so we do have to slow down a little bit. And it is really, really essential. And and I had so much of this identity is that when I moved into my own business, I ended up working 70, 80 hours a week at first. And I would just be spinning cycles because I was just doing all the things rather than really sitting down and going, what's really important? And for me, like a big break from this productivity was last year. Excuse me. Last year, I realized that I wasn't focused on what was most important to me because I kept saying that what was most important is having my own time, going and traveling. But I was working all of these hours because I thought, oh, I got to produce more. I got to produce more, right? Make more money and get my money back up to where it's supposed to be. All of these things. And last year, I decided that I wasn't going to work over 45 hours a week ever. And maybe I did it once or twice in the entire year. But what turned out is I actually got more done. And the things that I got done, I wouldn't say more done. I got a lot more quality done over quantity. So the things that I was doing were more impactful. And I got to go to them with a full energy rather than like feeling like I'm always running on empty. And so that I just want to one example of like what happens when we slow down and actually do less things, we enjoy them more. Yeah, I mean, that's what it came down to me, right? I mean, because there was so many years where I felt like that hamster on that wheel, just kind of spinning and spinning and spinning and not really getting anywhere. And now I feel really connected to the work that I do and the things that I do. Um, so what happens when we take productivity on as an identity? What have you seen? Because you are a
Yeah.
productivity specialist.
I think we start to lose who we really are. And
Mm.
then it becomes well, if I slow down, then I have to confront that. Then it becomes,
Ooh.
now I have to figure out who I really am and what that means. And that's hard. And we're
Mm.
not a society that does emotions well. And I will put out there that I've been there too. Like I fully get that. Like I have lost who I used to be before I became a mom, and trying to figure out who I am outside of motherhood and running a business, right? I too have taken that on. I am a business owner. I do this. This is who I am. But who am I outside of that? And not letting that define me. And that's hard because then we have to sit with those feelings. And that's certainly something that maybe we all just need therapists. I've long thought we all just need therapists, but there's work in there of trying to figure that out. And we don't do that well as a society. And and I think you can do some, take some baby steps to getting there, sort of playing with, like, one of my goals for this year is to really figure out, like, I don't really have any hobbies. I love to travel. I love to read. I like to be outside, but I don't sit and, like, what I think of as hobbies, I'm not sitting down and like crocheting while I'm watching TV, or, I don't have something, I'm not crafty in that sense. And so I've decided this year, maybe instead of trying to just pick something, like, maybe I'll just learn how to quilt and I'll just take up quilting, or I need to redo some jewelry of mine. Like, well, maybe I'll just become a jewelry maker and I'll buy a whole kit and, like, this will be my thing. And I know that's not really who I, I am, but to play with that. So just
Mhm.
maybe once a month or every now and then I just try something new and just see how I feel about it. And and I'm not doing it because it's checking something off a to-do list. It's just doing something for fun. And I think, I think it's really just taking that step back to understand that we are not our to-do list, and that how much we get done every day it does not define who we are, and it does not define our worthiness.
Mm.
And just just doing it little by little, instead of kind of really just a huge step back and kind of throwing yourself off the deep end of trying to figure this out, but really taking that step back. And for me, it's figuring out, what is it I want my life to look like?
Mm.
What is it I want my day-to-day life? What are my long-term goals? What do I want my kids' childhoods to look like? And if
Mm.
you're at the other end of that, then maybe it's, what do I want this next chapter of my life to look like? And it's going to look different maybe than the last 20 years of raising kids. And then take some steps towards that. What is it I can do today or this week, as small as possible, to really start moving forward?
Mm. I love that. I think I've told this story before on the podcast, but there was right after I had done a lot of therapy and done some other women's stuff, I wanted to learn how to paint, and I had these messages from my younger days, and art teachers weren't so nice to me. So I bought all the paints and I stared at this canvas for like a year. And after a year, a friend of mine came over and was like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know what to paint. I got to paint something." And like, I went directly back to that productivity, right? That's who I am. I'm going to paint something that gets hung on the wall. And that made it so hard for me, because when we have those expectations, like you said, we have those expectations on our crafting and or our art or creativity, it puts so like, it's like we just put it back into the productivity pile. So it was like doing the complete opposite of what I wanted it to do, because I identified so much with, like, something's gotta come out of this, right? Like, I can't do action without having something come out of it. And my friend was like, "Christina, put the damn paints on the canvas and swirl them around. It's just about the colors moving together, and, just enjoy the process. It's not about having a masterpiece at the end. We're not expecting that." And that made it so much easier. And that's where I learned how to start playing, which meant play for me is anything that I do for my own joy and not for means to an end, not for some kind of box being checked or whatever. And that was really, really tricky for me, because I took that identity on. And for me, that's who I've always been. "Oh, Christina, she can figure out anything. She'll get it done. She'll check off the list. She'll meet that deadline. She'll do it really great too." And then, because even though I didn't know that I had taken on those identities until, like, I was facing the conflict of them, I realized, looking back, like, how much pressure I put on myself to I mean, it's just a form of people pleasing.
Mhm.
Is like, "Oh, they expect me to be the doer, so I'm gonna be the doer. Expect me to be the figure outer, so I'm gonna be the figure outer." But, we don't have to take that on. And I think that that's what you're talking about, is when we stop. we have to start looking at, what are these identities that I'm taking on? Is this really what I want? I mean, and of course, there are some people who love it, like go be the CEO if that's what you want to do. But for the rest of us who feel like we're getting stuck in this hamster wheel, or I know that the feeling that clients come to me is like every day is the same and they want to change it, but they can't because they're locked into this to-do list. They're locked into their calendar or their schedule. And so they don't feel like they have power to switch. And, that's all perception is what I have learned. And I love your questions about like, what is it? Like, who am I outside of being a mom, being a wife, being an employee? Like, who is the actual Christina at this point? Or am I just all of these roles? And I don't think any of us want to be just those roles.
Mm.
Yeah. So how do we start taking off this hat and getting curious about how productivity might be impacting, or this thought that we always have to be productive is
Yeah.
impacting our lives.
I love what you said about the people pleasing. I think as women, we've been raised to be serious people pleasers. I like to
Mhm.
consider myself a recovering people pleaser. I have 2 daughters, and I'm working really hard to help them not be people pleasers. And I see it in myself when somebody asks something of my 10-year-old where I would have just done it because that's just what I was taught to do. And
Mhm.
I have to hold back and let her make her own decision. And when she says no, sometimes I want to be like, okay, but they really need your help. Like, you really need to say yes. Like, why are you not? Why? When she has every right to say no. And I appreciate that she feels confident enough to say no and not be sucked into that people pleasing part of life. And I think it's really hard for us as women to step out of that. We've just been taught that we need to take care of everybody around us
Mhm.
and make everybody happy. And then we lose who we are. And
Mm.
so that to be able to step out of that productivity piece is it takes time. So let's set that expectation that it's not going to just happen overnight. But
Mhm.
it's really, I think, spending some time figuring out what it is you want to be doing. Maybe it's easier to define what you want your days to feel like, or how you want to be able to look back at the end of a calendar year or the end of a season and describe your life and say, these are the things that we did. This is what I enjoyed. This is a goal I am working towards. And then figuring out how to get there, what those steps look like. And through that, then spending some time and part of that too, so that there's those defining your goals, and then maybe spending some time figuring out your values. And I used to hate that word value. I don't know why. It just used to make me bristle. In the last few years, I've finally come to embrace it and go, okay, these are the values that I have. And am I living those
Mm.
values most of the time? Right? Maybe not every time.
Right.
One of my values that is more aspiring is fun, right? I want to have more fun in my life. But because I fall into that, let me check things off my to-do list, I forget that sometimes.
Mm.
Or I just schedule the fun because it's easier to, it happens that way, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I make my clients' schedule fun, like, especially it always reminds me of that quote that says something like, "Everybody should meditate for 15 minutes unless they are too busy, then they should meditate for an hour." So when my clients are way too busy and feeling overwhelmed, I ask them to take the first 15 minutes of their workday and just do something creative. Make a doodle, write a poem, whatever it is that has no productivity value. You're
Mhm.
not, doing anything, but you get to get your creativity out.
Mhm.
And what that does is like, it jars people at first because they're like 15 minutes. I could be doing something else that's more productive, right? And producing something.
Mhm.
And so it can be really hard, but it's like starting to look at that conflict and it within, because if what you're telling me is that what you really crave is creativity
Mm.
and you're not making time for it, then is that really important to you? Like we use intentions, but it's similar to values, right?
Mhm.
What is most important to you? And are you making choices that are in alignment with that? Or are we going back to that productivity? Because productivity can be a real addiction. It's a lot easier for women, a lot of women, to sit behind their computer and work 12 hours a day than it is for them to stop at 6 or 7 and then spend some time with themselves,
Mhm.
or even 8. And I understand people work jobs, but it's like almost an easier choice to sit behind this computer because you don't have to think about it's just like watching TV or drinking or whatever. It's just
Mhm.
you're turning off the emotions, and that is so much easier. And when we start, at least when I started approaching this productivity thing, and like, how much do I have to produce to be worthy? Right. I mean, because I started associating my value and my worth was what I produced.
Mhm.
And that's so dangerous because it was like, then I had to quantify it. Like, well, how many things do I need to check off the list before I can be nice to me? How many things um, make up for, me being lazy one day or whatever? Like, I had to quantify all this stuff and it was so crazy. And I was like, no, I don't need to do anything. In fact, I take a do nothing day now. Just this past Saturday, I had worked like 7 days in a row, not, full days, but a lot of days and held a lot of space. So Saturday morning, I woke up and I'm like, I'm doing nothing productive today, nothing, not one thing.
Mhm.
and and that way it reminds me, it sets the intention for me that during the day I don't have to feel guilty for doing nothing or productive, right? I was doing things, but things that I wanted to do. And I like shut that whole voice down and was like, nope, you're not coming out today because we're not producing anything today. Because it
Mhm.
can be a real inner critic voice. And I grew up poor. So, like, what I always think of is like, there was always people who would say like, "Oh, if you can't you're not working hard enough if you can't have the things that you want," right? You could always just be working hard enough. And I know a lot of
Mhm.
people that are poor and they work really dang hard.
Right.
And so like I think that in this country we have this like productivity always equals success, but
Mhm.
that's not always true. And I can tell you from my business that some of the busiest times I had were actually the least productive or
Mhm.
profitable anyway.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Christina, and I am your host of this series. And I wanted to offer you one little thing. The way that my clients find their midlife magic and mojo is by becoming intentionally aligned. You may not know what that means right now, but basically, we find out what we truly, truly want underneath that vision board. And then we align our life, our choices, actions, everything with our intentions. Now, you're wondering how that works? I can teach you more, but first, you're going to need 3 unique perspectives in order to move forward. And I have put all 3 of those perspectives in a 3-video series called the Intentionally Aligned Foundation Series. And I want you to go grab it now because it is going to shift the way that you look at things. And that is part of the magic in midlife, is that we get to choose new ways. That series is listed below in the description, or you can go to christina-smith.com /IA series. I hope that you enjoy these 3. There's going to be questions and even some optional other materials that you can dive a little deeper into how we become intentionally aligned. It's all free, so go check it out. It's just more perspectives for you to create that midlife mojo.
Yeah, we are told that there's a book that I love called Can't Even by Anne Helen Peterson, and she focuses on millennials, but as a zennial, I think is where I fit in all of that. I I related to it so much of just that, like, if you keep working, you will get somewhere. But our society is not set up that way. Like, the structure of our society is not that way. And that could be a whole other topic. But I
Sure.
think there is that we have just been told that if you keep working, you will make progress, you will be successful. And it's not true. And then you end up in that state of burnout. And this book talks a lot about burnout and how we are told it is our problem. It's an individual problem, but it's really a structural issue. But we're so tired and so deep within that burnout and deep within that belief of it's our fault. And if we just keep checking things off and keep working harder, that we'll get somewhere. We can't see that it's not our issue, that it's a structural issue. And then it feels even bigger and harder to deal with. But I think for the things that we do have control over, so that someday we have the energy to take on that structure, it's like, as you were talking about with the intentions and having those, it's making small steps towards that. So maybe it's just 5 minutes once a day. You're just going to sit and stare out the window or drink a cup of tea while you're doing that, or take a walk around the block. Just get out of your own head. I find, when I'm having a day where I'm just super stuck on something, I'm ruminating on a problem or something that happened, just taking a walk, just getting out of my own space helps clear that out. And then I can come back and be more productive. And I'm curious how, if you took all of Saturday to do nothing, did you come back to work this week feeling any different? Or back to the rest of
because
life?
I felt rested rather than like trying to, because on the weekends, sometimes I'll try to, get the house cleaned and do all the errands and do all of that stuff. And instead, I came back like ready, even though I had just worked 7 days and only had one day off. Like I came back to my coaching groups really clear about, everything and not exhausted, right? Like that's the thing. Like can I squeeze in more cleaning? Of course you always can. I mean, right? I mean, there's never an end to like being able to clean your house. But what was more important, I don't care if my house is a little dusty, if I'm feeling good about myself, right? My value is no longer relied on, is my house perfect? Have I maintained everything perfect? Have I done all my makeup and my hair and all of like none of that really. I get to choose. And I love how you said it's a long process, because it's not like one day I was like, "Oh, I'm just going to work less than 45 hours a week every week." That took years. I was building a business. So that took years for me to go, "Okay, this is okay." Like to give myself permission
Mm-hmm.
to be like, "Yep, you're not going to work 60 some hours a week, and let's just see. Let's just see if that means that I'll be less successful." And last year when I did that, it was one of my most successful years, because I get to put my whole heart in it. I'm not showing up half exhausted or dazed and confused, right? Like I'm showing up clear, I'm showing up ready, and it feels right in my heart, right? It's the brain, I think, that really tricks us, right? There's two different pieces, but the brain tricks us into going, you got the time. If like get your schedule out, we can block time this and we'll get it all done. And I used to do that, and it would make me crazy, because it was like I never gave myself enough time to actually get the things done. I did not Yeah, I just didn't plan right. Like, I'm like, "Oh, that thing should take me 15 minutes." It really takes 2 hours. But because I thought that other people might get it done in 15 minutes, I also had to hurry up and get it done. So I just wasn't doing quality work, and I didn't feel good about what I was doing or how I was showing up to it. I was just checking it off. And I gotta tell you, a lot of people will tell you how miserable I was when I was just checking off boxes. And yeah, I mean, especially as a single mom, I worked 2 jobs, and it was like taking my kid from daycare to a babysitter to home, and like having to do all the work in between. So I feel like one day I just got on that wheel, and it was so hard to get off. And it wasn't like one day I just jumped off. Like I had to learn how to slow the wheel down a little bit. I had to like maybe try to take one foot off and test the waters, right? So I love that you were like, this is not an overnight thing. This is not like a New Year's resolution. Tomorrow I'm waking up a new person. That's not what this is about. But I think for me, it's about challenging the things that come up. When I say, I want to spend more time with my kids or my husband, but I'm choosing to work late. Am I making choices that are like, why am I doing that? If I say that this thing is more important and I still make choices to do this other thing,
Mhm.
then I have to start asking myself questions about that. Is what I say is important really important? And how am I showing that to myself? So it's really about challenging the little conflicts that come up, like when you want to say no, like your daughter, um, and challenging that voice that comes up that goes, "Oh, but maybe you're not a good friend if you don't do that, and you really could do that, so you should." And yeah, we could just slide some things around or whatever. Like that conflict is the thing that we need to look at.
Mhm.
Instead of just saying yes to everything. Because I think most leaders say no to most things. Like really great leaders only say yes to those things that are really a yes.
Yes, absolutely. And there's that if you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And so you
Yes.
need to make sure that that yes is a heck yes and that you mean it. And maybe it's like a muscle that you just need to strengthen little by little over time. And I
Mhm.
recently over the holidays somebody had called needing some help and I knew that I did not have the capacity. Like I knew I could fit in the couple hours they needed, but I would be resentful doing it. And I said no, and it was hard. And I'm really glad I said no. And then my schedule cleared a few days later. Some things got canceled and rescheduled. And I thought, well, I'm going to call them back and tell them I can help out. And my husband was like, you don't need to do that. Like, it's okay that you said no and you stuck with it. And that little people pleaser in the back of my brain was like, no, really, they need your help. Like, seriously, go
Mm.
help. And like, no, I'm not. My schedule cleared and now I have time to do something for me.
Mm.
And so it's that muscle. Like next time I may say yes because it's sort of I
It
forget
fits.
that I'm practicing, but it's that like paying attention. And I think when you know your intentions or your values or your goals or whichever word there like resonates most with
Yeah.
you,
Whatever's most important to you.
yeah, then you can figure out whether you want to say yes or no. And maybe it's we're just going to try this and see. I'm not going to
Mhm.
commit forever, but I'm going to say yes for now and know that maybe I can step away if it doesn't work. Or I'm going to say no for now and
Mm.
then come back later and really figuring out what that means. And I don't want your listeners to hear that this takes a long time and to just be like, I can't be bothered. Like it takes
Yes,
like
but it
even
takes
the
a
little,
while.
yeah.
Like, it's layers of an onion is how I
Mhm.
see it. So
Mhm.
it's like, I'm not saying that you're not gonna see change in,
Yeah.
like, making a few different choices. You definitely can see change. And, if you're today working 80 hours a week and you're like, "Oh, I wanna go down to part-time," that might take a little longer for you to get accommodated to, right? It's like you said, if somebody loses their job, that's really tough on them. That's like all of their productivity just down a drain. And so I'm
Mhm.
not trying to say that we should all just quit our jobs and not do anything anymore. I don't want us to get to that point. I mean, to your point, like when I'm saying yes or no, there's been plenty of times where I've said yes and then felt really resentful and angry about it.
Mhm.
And then I'm not really doing them justice either because I'm not
Mhm.
showing up for them in a way in which I feel good about.
Mhm.
And so they're not getting the real true value of who I am if I'm saying yes just because I want to, and then I feel angry and resentful about it later, then I have to deal with all that energy and whew, that's too much for me these days. Yeah, so we definitely can see changes really quickly. I don't want to say that we can't. But to say that today I work 80 hours and now I'm just going to put boundaries. I'm only going to work 20 hours a week. Like that would probably be extreme. Good
Mhm.
luck. I mean, if that's what you want to do and that feels right to you, I want you to try it and you come back to me and Valerie and you let us know how it worked
No.
out because I think that that would be awesome. And yet I just don't want that to be the expectation that I make one choice and then all of a sudden my whole life is different because
Mhm.
that for me at least, it was a large onion with lots and lots of different layers that I had to be like, oh, here's another conflict inside going, I really don't want to do that thing, but somebody needs to do it and somebody should do it. And, all that conflict. So for me, it was harder. And I hope it's not nearly as challenging for other people.
Yeah, I think it is important to remember that even just a little shift can really have a huge impact. That 5 minute
Yes.
staring out the window or just a 10-minute walk around the block is huge. And if you can
Hmm.
do that 2 or 3 times a day, even better.
Oh, yeah.
And just fit something little in there. And I'm a big believer in small steps that
Hmm.
will get you there because that feels more doable, right? Like
Yeah.
I've learned that there are things with my business that I cannot spend days and days or hours and hours on. So I have learned where in my week to plan like my content writing. I don't love writing content for social
Yeah.
media. And I would love to
Hello.
be weeks ahead of myself, but right now I can write 1 week at a time and
Hmm.
then that's it. And so if I'm working for that week, like whatever that looks like, but I have learned I don't have the energy to put into just consistently writing more and more content. And so I have figured out how to make that work for me. And so it's really I'm not going to just keep writing for hours a week. It's just not going to happen. You'll be able to see it over the course of my Instagram posts. They get like crappier as I get more tired. And I can look back and see like that was a week where I was really not inspired. And it's clear because those posts were just thrown together
Yeah,
versus
yeah,
really
and
wanting to
people who
reach out.
read them
Hmm.
people who read them are gonna be able to tell because it's like, "Oh, that's not the full Valerie energy, is it?" So, although we could talk about this all day, what is
Yes.
one thing that you wanna leave our listeners with?
I understanding that you are not your to-do list and
Mm,
that it takes time, but it is really possible to step back and start figuring out who you are outside of that to-do list. And that it's little by little and it may take years, but it's really worth um, that process.
mm.
And that you're not alone, that there are people out there going through the same struggles and that there are people to help you and guide you through that as well.
Beautiful. And if you need help or guidance with that, I've put all of Valerie's information in the description so that you guys can go to her website, check out her Instagram,
Mhm.
and connect with her. Thank you so much, Valerie, for being here today and talking to us about this really important topic that I think kind of goes untalked about sometimes because it's just like such a norm in our society that we've just become accustomed to it. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Talk again next week. Hey, one more thing. When we are all more confident and full of self love, we can act more intentionally and mindfully. What would a world like that look like? I want to know. One way that you can help me with this vision is to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast wherever you listen to it. It helps more than you know, and it's just a few clicks to help me create a more beautiful world. And as always, remember to be gentle with your humanness.